Okay, good morning. Today is the 8th of Tammuz and the 27th of June. Like we said, we're reading according to the reading outside of the land of Israel, so it's actually quite long. It's all the way from the third reading is all the way from Numbers 20 verse 22 all the way to almost the end of Chukat to 21 verse 20. So it's almost a whole chapter. There's a lot of stories that go on here, and we're exactly on the other side of the sending of the spies, because sending the spies was sort of like trying to 40 years earlier make the first entrance into the land of Israel, and that didn't work too well. And now they are entering, they're beginning the process, and they're coming to cope with all the things that normal people cope. Meaning for 38, 39 years in the wilderness, they were pampered in a certain sense. They were like in a different world, not the world the regular people have. Almost one would say, they, in a certain sense, they never left Mount Sinai. That's why it's called the wilderness of Sinai. But now they're beginning to enter the land, and so there's all kinds of incidents. And the incident that's strongest and most powerful in this reading, I believe, is the incident with the snakes. And what happened was that they did what a lot of us do, which is they complained. And they complained about the manna, which was actually the thing that was keeping them alive. But they said, this manna, there's no such food in the world. You eat it and there's no waste products. It's completely absorbed by the body. So what is going on? And they were afraid because they're like a mosquito. They're consuming and there's nothing coming out, that they would eventually burst. The retaliation was that they began to be bitten by these snakes that were there. And I'll just read quickly through what happened. So they journeyed from where Aaron had passed away by the way of the Sea of Reeds. And the people spoke against God and against Moses. Why have you brought us out of Egypt to die in the desert? For there's no bread, only manna, and no water, only the traveling well, and we are weary of this light bread. And God sent against the people the venomous snakes, and they bit the people, and many people of Israel died. The people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against God and against you. So right away, Rashi says there, and the snakes were the retaliation, because the snake is the one who spoke in the Garden of Eden, who spoke ill, who spoke, again, it says it's like the flip side of what happened with the spies. So again, they're saying something negative, and they're being retaliated against with the serpent, with the snake, who also is known to have said something negative. And again, there's this principle that we call midah keneged midah, that God always sends us something that has to do with our own conduct, so that we can recognize it, so that we can see it, and it's not a complete mystery. Why am I being? Why are my difficulties in a particular area? The reason is because wherever the area of the difficulty is, it's telling me something about my own conduct. In any case, so the people came to Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against God and against you. Pray to God that He remove the snakes from us. And Moses prayed on behalf of the people. And God said to Moses, He answered the prayer, and He said, make yourself a viper and put it on a pole, and let whoever was bitten look at this pole and live. So Moses made a copper snake and put it on a pole, and if a snake had bitten a man and he looked intently toward the copper snake, he lived. So the main thing that the sages always note about this is that Moses wasn't told how to make this viper, how to make this snake, and he made it out of copper. Why did he make it out of copper? Because in Hebrew, when you read the Hebrew text, it's very clear. נחשת is what we call two words that sound the same. Nachash is snake, and copper is נחשת. And even though there's no seemingly connection between them, between these two words, but they almost are the same word. The sages say from this that it's called lashon nofel al lashon, that one word, it's as if it falls on the next word. It's like your tongue sort of says one and then it says the other. It's phonetically connected. Where was the first time that this happened? They say this about man and woman in Hebrew. Now it's interesting that in English it's not so far away, but in other languages except for modern languages this wasn't common, that ish, isha, man and woman, they also are phonetically the same. That one is from the other, one is dependent on the other, they're connected to one another, phonetically and in practice. And so the sages say that this was proof that the world was created with this language. In other words, what are they saying? They're not saying this is like some kind of historical, linguistic studies type of proof. That's not the idea. The idea is that when you use this language, you feel the creation of the world. Now, what's most amazing about this, meaning that one thing leads to another, there's a connection between things. Now, what's most amazing about this is נחשת נחשת equals, in the beginning God created. בראשית ברא. It's equal to the first two words of the Torah. So there's a direct link between the serpent, this copper snake that he made, and the creation. And what's the idea here? In Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe explains, why did a person have to look at this copper snake to be healed? He says it's not the copper snake that heals. It's looking at the copper snake and remembering that we're in the hands of God. So the copper snake was just a remembrance of God. So why even make a copper snake? Why not just tell them, look, your healing comes from God. Why do you need to look at the snake? So the deep idea, he says, behind this is that because of all these references to creation, when God created the world, it was a Garden of Eden. He meant it to be a positive thing. What happened? That as the world goes through its development and people do things that are wrong, so it's not that the world becomes a bad place, but we can't keep things straight anymore. In the same way that the first sin was a change of consciousness. That until then they were living in the Garden of Eden, and then they're out of the Garden of Eden. They're in a different world. It's still the same world. The sages say the Garden of Eden was not somewhere else. It's here. It's a different perspective on this world. And so they lost that perspective. And as time goes on and humanity continues to develop, we get deeper and deeper into this false picture painted by the snake, as it were. Painted by our consciousness. We lose sight of what the truth is. And what's the truth? Only in our mind's eye can we remind ourselves that the world is good. That there is no negative in the world. There is no evil in the world. In fact, there's a verse that says, no evil descends from above. There's no such thing. God did not create the world to create pain and hardship. The pain and the hardship is something in the way that we interpret things. Now, go tell that. That's why I said one of the biggest thinkers in Chabad told me, never teach this, because people can't handle this today. But it's the original thinking. What does it mean? It means I just had, let's say someone has a debilitating disease, and you come and you say to them, look, there's really no pain in the world. What are they going to do with that? They can't really do anything with that. And yet, this is considered to be the type of service, divine service, that is needed. It's one of the hardest to do, maybe the hardest to do, which is especially during prayer to look at the source of everything. The same way the נחשת נחשת, the copper snake here equals בראשית ברא, in the beginning God created. It's to look back at the source and say that everything that I'm experiencing is negative is not really that way in its source. I have to go back to its divine source. And in the divine source, it's all good. There's no negative. Now, how long can I hold this thought for? Can I hold this thought for a minute, for 2 minutes, for 10 minutes? In Chassidus, it's explained that this is the essence of divine service, to be able to do this. And of course, I can't say this to someone else. Only a person can say this to himself. Meaning, in other words, that they had to look at the copper snake to come to that conclusion themselves. Moses could only hint at it. But I can't tell someone, look, stop thinking that you're suffering. There's no suffering here. If you say that to someone, you've literally killed them, because they're suffering right now. But when the person does it voluntarily, of his own, that he pursues this type of thinking, even if you can hold it on, you can hold it in your mind for only a few minutes, that is what changes reality. And the example that's brought in this respect of a normal person doing this in later generations is the famous story about a man named Nachum, the man from Gamzu. And Nachum was a man who was a sage, one of the sages. He was a teacher of Rabbi Akiva, and he was sent to Rome to appease the emperor at some point. And he took with him a box full of jewels and rubies and gold. And somewhere along his path, somebody caught hint of this box, and they replaced its contents with dust, with just sand. And he ended up coming before the emperor, and he brings this wonderful gift, and they open the box, and there's sand inside. Why was Nachum called a man from Gamzu? Ostensibly because that was where he was from. That was the name of his town, Gamzu. But Gamzu also means this too, or also this. And so he stood there before the emperor, who now wants to kill him because he's just insulted him by bringing him sand as a gift. And he says to himself, this too is good, or this too is for the best. As he's thinking this, and how long can you hold this thought when you're in front of the emperor who wants to kill you? So he held on to this thought for some time. And suddenly one of the advisors there says, Emperor, it can't be that the Jews, that the Hebrews insulted you this way. This must be special dust. And so he suddenly says, this dust is probably what they have left over from their ancestor, from Abraham, who said about himself, I am dust and ashes. And with that, he had this dust and ashes with which he won a war against the four mightiest empires in the east at that time. So he says this is the dust from Abraham, and we can use it to conquer our own enemies. And indeed, that's what they did. They tried it out, and it turned out that this dust was some kind of magical formula to conquer their enemies. So the Alter Rebbe says this is an example of somebody taking an impossible situation where he's facing certain death. The emperor is going to kill him. And he continues to hold on to this thought that there is no evil that descends from above. Meaning that in spite of the fact that I've now been placed in this position that looks hopeless, it's all good. It's all for the best. And because of that, the situation transformed into something positive. And that is the idea of the copper snake. If you can hold on to this thought that the origin of everything is good, it's like you have to remember this when you're suffering. The origin from which the world started was Berashit bara. In the beginning God created, and it's Bereshit bari, as we like to say, that it's in the beginning, it's healthy, it's good, like the Garden of Eden. This type of service is what transforms reality. And therefore, when the people who were bitten saw this copper snake and they meditated upon it with intent, they thought about it with intent, and they realized there's no evil that descends from above, they were healed. So, I wish everyone, this is a difficult lesson, it's a difficult thing to work on. It's probably the hardest thing in the entire Torah. Doing this is probably harder than anything. It's harder than fasting. It's harder. It's just hard. It's hard than being nice to your parents. It's one of these things that really, really challenges us. But it's seen time and time again that when a person can bring themselves to this state, things change. Maybe some other time I'll give some examples. There's a famous example with the Rebbe's father about this type of thought that he had for 41 days. He wasn't able to do it for 41 days straight, but every day he held on to this thought for a few minutes, he says, and he was able to beat a disease that 90% of the people that have die from. And so there's many stories like this about this thought, but it's the most powerful and most difficult thought that we can have, that the source of everything is good, and even if I feel the suffering now, I have to concentrate on the source. And concentrating on the source transforms the present reality. So thank you very much for joining. Hope to see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.